the babysitter. The Johnsons had been looking forward to their night out for weeks. An elegant dinner followed by a movie was the perfect break from their routine. Mrs. Johnson had been meticulous in finding the right babysitter for their 7-year-old son, Billy. Violet came highly recommended. A sweet, responsible teenager with glowing references. She seemed like the perfect choice. When Violet arrived at 6 p.m., she wore a bright smile, her blonde hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She was polite, friendly, and instantly charmed the Johnsons. Billy, shy at first, warmed up to her quickly. The parents left with peace of mind, trusting that their son was in good hands. The evening started normally. Violet made Billy's favorite mac and cheese, and they sat together watching cartoons. After dinner, she suggested they play a game. Billy, eager for fun, agreed. But instead of the usual board games, Violet had something different in mind. "Let's play Truth or Dare, Billy," she said, her eyes glinting with a strange excitement. Billy hesitated but agreed. The game started innocently enough with simple dares and harmless truths. Then Violet's questions grew darker. "Have you ever been so scared you couldn't move?" she asked, leaning in close. Billy shook his head, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Would you like to hear a scary story?" Violet's voice dropped to a whisper. Billy shook his head again, but Violet ignored him, her smile widening. Violet's stories were horrifying, filled with gruesome details that left Billy trembling. She described monsters lurking under beds, ghosts that whispered secrets in the dark, and a babysitter who turned out to be a monster. Billy's fear escalated until he couldn't take it anymore. "Stop! I don't like it!" he cried, tears streaming down his face. Violet's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "You're such a baby, Billy. Maybe you need some time alone to think about being braver." She grabbed Billy by the arm and dragged him upstairs. Despite his protests, she shoved him into his bedroom and locked the door. Billy pounded on the door, sobbing and begging to be let out, but Violet ignored him. He heard her footsteps receding down the hall, followed by the eerie silence of the house. Trapped in his room, Billy tried to calm down. He could hear Violet moving around the house, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. He listened as she rifled through drawers, opened and closed doors, and even the occasional sinister giggle. What was she doing? Why was she acting so strange? Billy's curiosity grew, mingling with his fear. He tried the door again, but it was locked tight. Looking around his room, he noticed the vent near the floor. It was small, but maybe he could fit through it. Desperate, he pried the cover off and squeezed inside. Crawling through the dark, dusty vent was terrifying, but Billy's determination pushed him forward. He reached the end and pushed out into an unfamiliar part of the house. It was an old, forgotten room, filled with cobwebs and shadows. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The room was a shrine to Violet's past victims. Photos of children, some smiling, others looking terrified, covered the walls. Personal belongings, teddy bears, dolls, clothes were scattered around, each one a grim memento. Billy's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the horrifying truth. Violet wasn't just a strange babysitter. She was a psychopath. Panicking, Billy searched for a way out. He needed to escape and warn his parents. As he moved, he knocked over a stack of photos, sending them fluttering to the ground. The noise echoed through the house. "Billy!" Violet's voice called from the hallway, closer than he expected. "Where are you, Billy?" Billy froze, his breath catching in his throat. He could hear her footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. He scrambled to hide behind an old dresser, peeking out just enough to see the door creak open. Violet stepped inside, her expression twisted with malevolent glee. "Oh, Billy, you found my little secret." Billy's heart pounded in his chest as he watched her scan the room. She walked over to the fallen photos, picking one up and smiling at it. "These children were just like you, Billy. So scared, so helpless." She looked around the room, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "But I had fun with them, and now it's your turn." Billy held his breath, trying to remain perfectly still. He knew he had to stay hidden, had to find a way to escape before Violet found him. Violet moved closer to his hiding spot, her footsteps echoing in the silent room. Billy's mind raced, searching for an escape plan. Just as Violet was about to reach the dresser, Billy bolted, darting past her and out the door. He heard her scream of rage behind him as he ran down the hallway, his small feet pounding on the wooden floor. "Billy, come back here." Violet's voice was shrill, filled with anger and excitement. "You can't hide from me." Billy's heart raced as he fled through the house, desperate to find a way out. He reached the living room and saw the front door, his path to freedom. But just as he was about to reach it, Violet tackled him from behind, dragging him to the floor. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed, her grip tight on his arm. Billy struggled, kicking and screaming, but Violet was too strong. She dragged him back towards the hidden room, her face a mask of twisted delight. "This is going to be so much fun," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. Billy's mind raced. He needed to find a way to stop her. As they neared the room, he spotted a heavy vase on a nearby table. With all his strength, he grabbed it and swung it at Violet's head. The vase shattered on impact, and Violet collapsed, stunned. Billy didn't wait to see if she was unconscious. He ran for the front door, flinging it open and racing outside into the night. Billy's parents arrived home shortly after, finding the house eerily silent. The front door was wide open, and a sense of dread settled over them as they stepped inside. "Billy," Mrs. Johnson called, her voice trembling. "Violet." They searched the house, finding no sign of their son or the babysitter. Panic set in as they reached the hidden room, the photos and memorabilia revealing the horrifying truth. In the living room, they found Violet sitting calmly on the couch, her head tilted to one side, eyes gleaming with malevolence. She smiled as they entered, her expression sending chills down their spines. "Where is our son?" Mr. Johnson demanded, his voice shaking with fear and anger. Violet's smile widened. "Billy's gone, just like the others." The parents' hearts sank as they realized the true horror of the situation. Violet wasn't just a babysitter. She was a monster, and their son was her latest victim. The police arrived soon after, but Billy was nowhere to be found. The Johnsons' house was searched top to bottom, but there was no trace of the boy. Violet was taken into custody, her twisted smile never leaving her face. She refused to tell them where Billy was, reveling in their despair. Days turned into weeks, and the search continued. The Johnsons were left with a gaping hole in their hearts, their lives forever changed by the night they trusted Violet. And somewhere, hidden away, Billy's fate remained a chilling mystery, his final moments a terrifying secret kept by the cold-hearted babysitter. The babysitting gig. Sarah was a college student, balancing her studies with part-time jobs to make ends meet. When the Parker family, new to the neighborhood, posted a babysitting job, Sarah eagerly accepted. The Parkers seemed like a nice, quiet family, and the job paid well. It seemed like an easy way to earn some extra cash. Sarah arrived at the Parkers' house around 6 p.m. The house was a large, old Victorian with an air of mystery about it. Mr. and Mrs. Parker greeted her warmly and introduced her to their daughter, Lucy. Lucy was a small, delicate girl of about 8 years old, with pale skin and wide, dark eyes that seemed to see right through you. "She's a bit shy," Mrs. Parker explained, patting Lucy on the head. "But she's a good girl. Just make sure she's in bed by 9. With that, the Parkers left for their evening out, leaving Sarah alone with Lucy. First, things were quiet. Lucy hardly spoke, responding to Sarah's attempts at conversation with nods and one-word answers. They ate dinner in near silence, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Sarah suggested they watch a movie, but Lucy shook her head. "Okay, how about a game?" Sarah offered, trying to lighten the mood. Lucy looked at her with those unsettling eyes and finally spoke. "Do you know any games about ghosts?" Sarah laughed nervously. "No, I don't think so. How about hide and seek?" Lucy's lips curled into a small smile. "Okay, you hide, and I'll seek." Sarah agreed, glad to have gotten some response from the girl. She hid in the kitchen pantry, trying to keep her breathing quiet. Minutes passed, and she heard nothing. Just as she was about to come out, a whisper brushed against her ear. "I found you." Sarah spun around, but there was no one there. The door to the pantry swung open, and Lucy stood there, her face expressionless. "Good job," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "You found me." Lucy said nothing, just turned and walked away. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the house grew more oppressive. Sarah tried to watch TV, but the channels kept flickering, showing static or strange, distorted images. She heard whispers that seemed to come from the walls, words she couldn't understand. Lucy sat in the corner of the living room, humming a tune that sounded ancient and eerie. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped. Sarah shivered, pulling her sweater tighter around her. "Are you cold, Lucy?" she asked. Lucy looked up, her eyes darker than before. "No, they're here." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Who's here, Lucy?" Lucy pointed to a dark corner of the room. "Them." Sarah turned, but saw nothing. Her phone buzzed, and she grabbed it, relieved to have a distraction. It was a message from Mrs. Parker, asking how things were going. Sarah quickly typed a response, but the message wouldn't send. She checked the signal, no service. A chill ran down her spine. The house felt like it was closing in on her. She decided to get Lucy to bed early. "Come on, Lucy, it's bedtime." Lucy didn't protest, just followed Sarah up the stairs. As they reached the top, Sarah glanced back down the hallway and saw something move in the shadows. She hurried Lucy into her room and tucked her in. "Good night, Lucy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucy grabbed her hand, her grip icy cold. "Don't leave me alone with them." Sarah sat in the hallway outside Lucy's room, listening to the eerie silence. She needed to figure out what was happening. The whispers grew louder, and she realized they were coming from the attic. Summoning her courage, she climbed the creaky stairs to the attic. The attic was filled with old furniture and boxes, dust swirling in the beam of her flashlight. In the corner, she found an old trunk. Inside were ancient books, filled with symbols and languages she didn't recognize. One book was open, displaying a picture of a demonic figure. A chill settled over her as she read the caption. "The spirit of the Ancient One, bound to the innocent, seeks to consume all who enter its domain." Sarah's mind raced. Lucy was possessed by an evil spirit. She needed to get out to get help, but when she turned to leave, the attic door slammed shut. Sarah pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. She pulled out her phone, but it still had no signal. Panic set in. She was trapped in a house with a possessed child and an ancient evil spirit. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and there stood Lucy, her eyes now completely black. "You found the book," she said in a voice that was not her own. Now you belong to us. Sarah backed away, her heart pounding. Lucy, please, you have to fight it. Lucy stepped forward, the air around her growing colder. There is no Lucy, only us. Sarah felt an invisible force pushing her against the wall, her limbs pinned as if by unseen hands. Lucy, or the spirit within her, smiled, a chilling, malevolent smile. You will join us, the spirit hissed. You will be our new vessel. Sarah struggled, but the force was too strong. She felt a cold presence invading her mind, her thoughts becoming muddled and distant. The spirit was taking over, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Mr. and Mrs. Parker arrived home to find the house eerily silent. The lights flickered as they stepped inside, a cold draft chilling them to the bone. Sarah? Lucy? Mrs. Parker called, her voice trembling. They searched the house, finally reaching the attic. There, they found Sarah and Lucy sitting together in the dark, holding hands. Their eyes were black, their expressions vacant. Welcome home, they said in unison, their voices blending into one. We've been waiting for you. The Parkers stared in horror, realizing too late the true nature of the evil they had brought into their home. The spirit now had two vessels, and it was hungry for more. The house filled with whispers as the door slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate. The Parker house stood silent for weeks, a dark presence lingering within its walls. The neighbors noticed the family had gone missing, but no one dared to enter. The whispers continued, and at night, if you listened closely, you could hear the faint sounds of children laughing, mingled with the cries of those trapped within. Sarah and Lucy were never seen again, their bodies vessels for the ancient, malevolent spirit. The house became a place of legend, a warning to all who dared to enter. For within those walls, the spirit waited, hungry for new souls to possess. The child is not what you think. Abby Miller was thrilled to get a babysitting job. As a high school junior, earning some extra money for the weekend was always welcome. Mrs. Harrison had seemed nice enough, and the pay was surprisingly good. When Abby first saw the house, a sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, she felt a shiver of apprehension but quickly brushed it off. It was just an old house, after all. Mrs. Harrison greeted her at the door with a warm smile. Thank you so much for coming, Abby. Timmy is already asleep upstairs. He's a good boy, but he can be a bit shy. Abby smiled and nodded, taking in the antique furniture and dim lighting. No problem, Mrs. Harrison. I'll take good care of him. As Mr. and Mrs. Harrison left for their evening out, Abby settled into the living room, flipping through channels on the old TV. The house was eerily quiet, with only the occasional creak of the floorboards breaking the silence. An hour passed uneventfully until she heard it. A soft giggle from upstairs. Timmy? She called out, walking towards the staircase. There was no answer. She hesitated but then decided to check on him. The hallway upstairs was dark, the only light coming from a partially open door at the end. Abby walked slowly, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. Peeking into the room, she saw a small boy sitting on the bed, his back to her. Timmy, are you okay? She asked softly. The boy didn't respond. She took a step closer, but when she reached the bed, it was empty. Heart pounding, she looked around the room but found no sign of him. Shaking her head, she whispered to herself, "It's just my imagination." Back in the living room, Abby tried to focus on the TV, but the strange occurrences continued. She heard footsteps running down the hallway, soft whispers, and that eerie giggle that sent chills down her spine. Each time she investigated, there was no one there. By midnight, Abby's nerves were frayed. She decided to make herself a cup of tea to calm down. As she filled the kettle, she noticed an old, yellowed newspaper clipping stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. Curiosity piqued. She read the headline, "Tragic Accident Claims Young Life." Her eyes widened as she saw the picture of a boy, Timmy. The article was dated 5 years ago. "No, this can't be right," Abby muttered, her hands shaking. She read on, learning that Timmy had died in a tragic accident at the very house she was in. Panic set in as she realized the boy she had been seeing was a ghost. Desperate to leave, Abby rushed to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. She tried the windows, but they were sealed shut. The house seemed to be alive, trapping her inside. A cold breeze swept through the room, and Abby heard a faint whisper, "Don't go." She turned to see Timmy standing at the foot of the stairs, his eyes dark and hollow. "You can't leave," he said in a voice that was not entirely his own. Fear clawed at her throat. "What do you want from me?" Timmy smiled, a chilling expression that sent a jolt of terror through her. "You'll stay with me, forever." Abby backed away, her mind racing. She had to find a way out, but every door, every window was locked tight. She grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the room grew unbearably cold, and Abby felt a hand grip her shoulder. She screamed, spinning around to see nothing but darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding her. "You'll stay," the voices chanted. "You'll stay with us." Abby's vision blurred as tears streamed down her face. She stumbled into the living room, searching for anything that might help her escape. Her eyes fell on the fireplace poker, and she grabbed it, wielding it like a weapon. "Stay back," she shouted into the empty room. The whispers stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Then, with a sudden force, the poker was ripped from her hands, and she was thrown against the wall. Pain exploded in her head, and she crumpled to the floor, dazed. As she lay there, struggling to stay conscious, she saw Timmy standing over her, his expression one of sorrow and malice. "I'm sorry, Abby," he said softly, "but I need you here." The room darkened, and Abby felt herself being pulled into an abyss, a cold, suffocating void. She fought to stay awake, but it was futile. The last thing she heard was Timmy's voice, whispering, "Forever." 3 days later, the Harrisons returned home to find the house eerily quiet. They called for Abby, but there was no response. Her belongings were there, but she was nowhere to be found. The police were called, but no trace of her was ever discovered. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The townsfolk whispered about the old house and the tragic fate of those who entered it. They spoke of Abby, the girl who had disappeared, and of Timmy, the boy who had died but never left. Years passed, and the house remained empty, a dark silhouette on the outskirts of town. Occasionally, someone would hear the faint sound of a child's laughter or see a flicker of movement in the windows, but no one dared to enter. The legend grew, and the house became a place of fear and mystery. But Abby's story was not forgotten. She had joined Timmy, another lost soul in the haunted mansion, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to join them in their eternal, ghostly existence. The babysitter's unusual practices. The Williams family lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew everyone else. Megan had been their trusted babysitter for almost a year. She was a college student, diligent and kind, with an easy smile that reassured parents. When the Williams needed someone to watch their baby, Annalisa, for a rare night out, they didn't hesitate to call Megan. "Thank you so much, Megan. We really appreciate this," Mrs. Williams said as she handed Megan the baby monitor. Annalisa's already asleep. Just make yourself at home." "No problem at all, Mrs. Williams. You two have a great night," Megan replied, her smile warm and reassuring. The Williams left, and the house settled into a comfortable quiet. Megan wandered through the living room, glancing at the family photos on the walls. She paused, her fingers tracing the edges of a photo of Annalisa, her expression unreadable. As the night deepened, Megan's demeanor shifted. She moved with a purpose now, her actions precise and deliberate. She began to mutter under her breath, strange words in an ancient tongue. She drew symbols on the floor with chalk she had brought with her, her eyes dark and intent. Upstairs, Annalisa slept peacefully, unaware of the dark intentions brewing below. A knock at the door interrupted Megan's preparations. She froze, then quickly hid her materials. Opening the door, she found Mrs. Jenkins, the nosy neighbor, standing on the porch. "Everything all right here, dear?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, peering past Megan into the house. Megan forced a smile. "Of course, Mrs. Jenkins. Just putting Annalisa to bed. Can I help you with something?" Mrs. Jenkins squinted, sensing something amiss, but nodded. "Just checking. Good night, Megan." "Good night," Megan replied, closing the door with a sigh of relief. Undeterred, she resumed her work. Candles were lit, and a low chant filled the air. She moved methodically, her mind focused on the ritual she had been planning for months. Annalisa was the key to the dark powers Megan sought, and tonight, she would complete the sacrifice. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jenkins' suspicions had not abated. She had noticed Megan's strange behavior earlier and decided to call the Williams. "It's probably nothing," she said to herself, dialing their number. "But better safe than sorry." At the restaurant, Mr. Williams answered his phone, his face growing pale as he listened to Mrs. Jenkins. "We need to go home. Now," he told his wife, urgency in his voice. Back at the house, Megan's chanting grew louder, her eyes wild with anticipation. She carried Annalisa, still asleep, to the center of the symbols she had drawn. As she raised a ceremonial dagger, the front door burst open. "Stop!" Mr. Williams shouted, his voice echoing through the house. Megan spun around, eyes blazing with anger. "You can't stop this. The power is mine." Mrs. Williams lunged for Annalisa, pulling her from the circle. Megan slashed with the dagger, but Mr. Williams tackled her, the blade clattering to the floor. They struggled, but the adrenaline-fueled father managed to pin her down. The police arrived moments later, alerted by frantic calls from Mrs. Jenkins and the Williams themselves. Megan was handcuffed and led away, screaming about the power that was rightfully hers. The Williams held Annalisa tightly, tears of relief streaming down their faces. The danger had passed, but the terror of what might have been lingered in their minds. The police assured the Williams that Megan would face justice for her actions, but the family couldn't shake the fear that had gripped their hearts. They moved forward, grateful for their safety, but always wary, knowing how close they had come to losing everything.